Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mind Matters, empowering conversations for public safety professionals, where we'll discuss topics involving wellness and first responders. Join me on this journey of learning from subject matter experts in their various fields of psychology, medicine, leadership, and many more. You can find our show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Let's get into the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Morris. Okay. Hello, this is Elizabeth Morris, and welcome to Mind Matters podcast. We have a very special guest today who I have known for many, many years. I think we're going on more than 20, which I think that's showing our age a bit. But we have Dr. Sam Gray joining us. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. Today, we're going to talk about peer support, the benefits of peer support, and specifically your role within peer support agencies and the work you've done for FMRT for actually going on 20 years now. So, yeah, without further ado, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us a little bit about your work outside of FMRT and family, anything you'd like to share.
Dr. Gray, I'm a licensed psychologist. I've been practicing since 2004. I've been doing work with the FMRT group since I think about 2007 now, really since this thing got started with you guys. And so it's been a lot of fun working with you all over the years and sort of seeing how the agency's grown and all the positive work that's been done. And so I'm just really happy. I have a private practice on the side that I work in and stay busy. I also teach as an adjunct professor over at Wake Forest University. So I've had a interesting career, and a lot of that's been doing work with FMRT, which I certainly have enjoyed. And so you guys have a good group, and it's been great working with you.
Well, thank you. And it has a lot to do with you and other clinicians, but particularly, with you, you're my go-to when it comes to training folks around peer support and just mental wellness and burnout, really from the beginning. I think you do a phenomenal job of connecting with your audience. We get feedback even from candidates. I don't know that I've shared this with you, but candidates that, will just say, he's really cool. Like, I thought it was going to be really scary, but they really, you have an ability to connect. And I think when we're talking about peer support, it is important that not only the clinician doing the training, but the peer support members do connect with their colleagues. I wanted to start with really the definition and what we follow as far as peer support guidelines from the International Association of Chiefs of Police Psych Services section, which says, the goal of peer support is to provide employees within agencies an opportunity to receive emotional and tangible support through times of both personal and professional struggle. And we, the FMRT group, and particularly you, follow the psychological first aid model. Do you want to just kind of dive in and kind of piggyback off of that definition and anything you'd like to share about what's different about the psychological first aid model?
Yeah, I think just kind of talking broadly about this type of work and what we're doing, and helping agencies develop peer support programs is that we're trying to, there's a lot of things that are already being done inside of all, first responder agencies, all public safety agencies. Everybody has their people that people go to, the ones they like to talk to, the ones they share with. And a lot of those folks already have sort of the natural skills to listen to people, to help them, to support them. And so if you think more broadly about agencies and public safety agencies, if you think of them as an organism in themselves, we know that healthy agencies, healthy organisms have to have all their parts working effectively and in a supportive manner. They have to help one another in order to be successful. And so generally what we found in working with these agencies is, folks who work in public safety positions are faced with enormous stressors. The jobs themselves can be very, very difficult. And so they're faced with things that most of us as civilians don't really ever have to experience in our lives, or very infrequently. And these are things that they're exposed to on a regular, frequent basis. And so most of us, and even a lot of mental health professionals, can't even understand what those challenges are like and what it is to have to face those kinds of things on a day-to-day basis, on a call-to-call basis. And so what we've tried to do with peer support is understand that within these agencies, probably the best people to sort of help and support each other are folks that also work in those fields. And so public safety officers frequently comment to me that they have a hard time figuring out, who do I talk to about this stuff? It's hard to go home to your family and talk to a spouse, a child, a parent about what you're going through, because that often just adds stress to them, and then they're more fearful for you. Many of them have sought out and found mental health professionals to talk to about these things, but some mental health professionals aren't trained adequately, don't have the experience of working with first responders, and so sometimes they find those experiences aren't as helpful as well. And so inevitably, and probably rightfully so, they frequently will turn to each other to talk about these things. And so who better to understand what you're going through than someone else who's also experienced or seen the same things? And so we found that that's actually a healthy and supportive way for agencies to work. Our job is to try to help those folks who are involved in communicating with one another to have the skills necessary to be most effective helpers to those individuals experiencing the stressors that we, as civilians, don't normally have to go through. So how can we help these individuals who are within these agencies to be better at providing, paraprofessional kind of interventions, quasi-counseling, those kinds of things. And so that's sort of the point of peer support. It just makes sense, and we found in working with and providing training to these agencies that they're healthier as a result of having individuals within that agency who can intervene and support their fellow peers when they're going through these kinds of stress.
And that's great, and that explanation of what the purpose is. I know with folks coming through agencies interested in peer support teams and creating those will come to us and say, like, what do I do? Where do I start? And you alluded to that in the beginning, as far as, someone that they just feel comfortable talking to. And then your role is really coming in and teaching them that quasi, mental health, but really when to refer out, what's your role, what is it not, and those skills. What skills do you think make the best peer support team member?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the basic things that I think all of us would think about, are you a good listener? You know how to actively sit down, listen, and show not just through words, but through your body language. That you're listening, that you're interested in the other person. People who are really good at communicating tend to be good peer support members. People who are discreet and can keep things private. People who have able to establish good boundaries with one another and know kind of limitations, because it can get a little sticky sometimes. And so people who are ethical, who are conscientious, those are the kinds of skills that we found within the most effective peer support.
Yeah, I agree with you. And when I go and present, a lot of times more to those kind of first line supervisors, the pushback, and unfortunately, is, well, we're not going to go to them because they're going to tell the command staff. And I think and the purpose, for us on this podcast is to explain some of those standings and bring clarity to the fact that the peer support team members, I mean, that is a big part of that initial workshop that you do with them is about confidentiality and when you need to refer out, being that you call FMRT and we connect you with a clinician, or you have the resources available to you, and that it's not intended and meant to be for disciplinary concerns. Or and of course there's those, what are those kind of three prong issues that it's like, if you tell me this, then I have to do this, this, and this, which may bring in the command staff. What are those things that someone may share that would trigger?
Yeah. So typically, in that case, if someone is in a situation where they're thinking about harming themselves, suicidal ideation, those kinds of things, or if they're in a situation where they're thinking of harming someone else, or if they're in a situation where abusing or neglecting an elderly person or a child, or in the case that they have violated some type of serious norm. Those are situations that kind of we have to disclose that information. Confidentiality no longer applies in those kinds of specific situations. I think sort of generally, a lot of these agencies, as we talked about, have people within them who are not maybe identified as peer support per se, but these are the kinds of folks who frequently people go to. They're just sort of known as the, hey, talk to Sergeant Jones. She's fantastic. She'll listen and she's great. So they have those folks within their agencies. But the nice thing about establishing a structured peer support program is it provides guidelines. It provides structure. It allows for these agencies and these folks to understand sort of the rules, the boundaries, how to operate within those things, and to provide a structure, to provide policies and guidelines for how to administer peer support in such a way that they don't find themselves in some of those sticky situations where you think you're in a confidential relationship and then someone discloses something that has to be taken upstairs or to supervisors. And if you establish that structure and those guidelines and those rules at the outset of a peer support program, then you can avoid some of those sticky situations that might get people into trouble or have them have bad experiences that make them not want to disclose further information to somebody.
Right. And sharing with the department that these parameters and policies exist. I think that's when it somewhat falls off. It's like, we know that they will not disclose unless, certain criteria are met. We know that they're going through substantial amount of training, but yet their colleagues they're not hearing that. They're just thinking, maybe, I don't know, it's an informal group that's just thrown together. And I do think that agencies can educate a little bit more when they have developed a peer team to say, these are the roles, these are the expectations, and this truly is confidential opportunity for you, and intended, right, for the more of the day-to-day stuff. I mean, I know we hear, and there's a component of the psychological first aid model that follows that critical incident stress management or debriefing. However, you are training more on the how to handle the day-to-day life stressors, as you were talking about before, life, and as opposed to, yes, when those critical incidents do arise, teaching them, training them how to manage that. But really, I I see a lot of these peer team members, they're the ones that are like looking around and making purposely checking on folks, doing pulse checks to ensure that it doesn't turn into like a behavioral issue and then they're being scheduled for a fit for duty, um or harming themselves. They are really looking out for their peers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty common. Like the critical incident things are the stuff that we all sort of hear about. And that's super important that the peer support folks are involved in those critical incidents, whether it's an officer involved shooting, those kinds of things, or a death scene. It's crucial that peer support are involved in those situations and that they're there on scene and helping and supporting our public safety officers in those situations. But what you don't think about as often are those little things that you described, which are maybe somebody's having some trouble with a spouse, maybe somebody's having some trouble with a teenage child who's been rebellious, those kinds of things where they may have, maybe they're having some financial problems, those are things that might not come up so immediately, as a critical incident, but peer support can lend itself to help those folks just as well, and almost in a prevention model to help those folks earlier on before those things reach a point where somebody is involved in a situation that requires administrative intervention of some kind. So having those kind of day-to-day interactions with people, just sort of being a peer support person all the time, always reaching out, always connecting, always offering to have coffee or talk to an officer about anything that's going on, with the understanding that those conversations are going to be confidential, can be super helpful at preventing some of those administrative and kinds of things from happening down the road. And so, folks who are on peer support, as you said, they've got a finger on the pulse of what's going on. And so they kind of hear about who might be struggling or having issues here. And they can reach out to those people. So I do think that part is probably not advertised as much as it should be, but that's a huge part of peer support. And as I said before, of keeping the entire agency, organism, if you will, healthy, is trying to connect with those folks and make sure that people know there's always somebody they can talk to, and it doesn't have to be a critical incident, for them to reach out and get support.
I agree. And we want to see that those peer team members are healthy themselves. And I know more from a tactical organizational process of putting it together, agencies do their own internal vetting. Initially just kind of putting it out there, who's interested. I think, yeah, who can keep their mouth shut. They do kind of a checklist there. But also, I think it's important, and you may or may not agree, of checking to see, has this individual that we're looking at to be a peer team member, have they had any disciplinary issues? Are there areas of concern? Possibly looking at internal affairs, that IA records, obviously only accessible to command staff. But I think bottom line, my point is, yes, they have their vetting process. Then they come through FMRT, and some do a full evaluation, like where you would sit down with them, and do that psychological evaluation with testing. And then some do testing by itself, which you do then go through in the workshop. It's just imperative, and we've seen both sides, team members that really you can tell should not be on the peer support team because they're not healthy themselves. They've not worked through their own stuff. How best to manage that? Well, how do you think?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're kind of talking about is sort of the selection process of how do we decide who are the most effective people to put on the peer support team. That's an important process for agencies to figure out who are the best people, because some of them might naturally sort of come forward, and everybody knows that Sergeant Jones is fantastic and has been really effective at helping other officers, and so Sergeant Jones might be an easy choice for the peer support team. Some of the other ones may be a little bit more challenging, and so some of the qualities we talked about earlier in terms of good peer support folks are the things that we want agencies to look for when they're selecting people for the peer support team. And of course, we put them through a battery of psychological tests and interviews, those kinds of things to help, some agencies make sure they're not putting the wrong people on those teams. I do think that, public safety officers who have been through difficult experiences, whether they've been involved in critical incidents, they can actually be really, really helpful on the team if, as you said, they have worked through those issues themselves and they're not continuing to struggle with those, because the folks who have worked through, we consider them resilient, people. If they have resilience and they've been able to overcome some of those critical incidents, then they're, usually very effective serving on peer support teams, because they can, sympathize with what people are going through. They can talk about their own struggles and how they overcame those and got to the point that they were. So it's a difficult balance sometimes, because, having folks who have been through those, even who've had trauma, responses or post-traumatic stress, those folks who have recovered from those kinds of situations can be fantastic people on your peer support team. Firstly, if you have someone who's been through those kinds of traumatic situations and haven't resolved and are still suffering from some of that traumatic stress, then they can do more harm than good, maybe, if they're put on.
Right. Tell me about, I mean, are there some real life success stories or testimonials? I mean, this could be even from folks you've seen outside of FMRT, um, with individuals that have been a part of like the peer team model. They don't necessarily have to be a part of the team, but have had an experience and interacted with a peer team member. Do you have any that you'd like to share? Or?
Sure. I mean, I would say generally, most of the anecdotal, information I get from people who've had interactions with peer support folks, because typically if I'm involved in doing a critical incident follow up with an officer, I'll ask about, hey, have you had, the peer support team come through? Have they talked to you? Have they checked in? And in probably 95% of those cases, the officers who've had peer support involved spoke positively of having someone to talk to. And I think it sort of depends on sort of strength of the peer support teams within an agency. So, for example, there's one agency who had an officer that was struggling with substance use issues. So they initially kind of had the peer support contact with the person, which was a good experience. But then the peer support team member kind of went to the larger team, staffed it with the team. They actually went out and sought out a treatment program for this officer. And were able to kind of get that officer engaged in a treatment program, so that officer actually went through rehabilitation. None of that stuff ever had to rise to the administrative level for that officer because they intervened soon enough that that officer was able to get treatment, return successfully to work. And so that's a specific example, but there's a lot of them, like
Yeah.
where people, if the peer support teams are strong, if they're aware of the resources that are available in those communities that they can connect people to, if they know when to refer those folks out to those types of services, and then they can not only refer them out, but see them through, to make sure they're connected, engaged, and follow up with them during and after treatment, then they tend to have a lot more success. And sometimes in those cases, those officers may not come back to work, or they may find that that's not the career that they want, and that's okay too. But I think that's the peer support teams that effectively engage and help folks through the process of treatment, if that's what they need, tend to have.
Yeah, I agree. And like us, many times they're the connectors, and it is imperative for each agency, I think, to do their due diligence of knowing what resources are available and vetting them, right? And you spoke to this a little while ago, is ensuring that yes, while mental health providers, I mean, they're coming from a good place, but ensuring that they are culturally competent, that they do get it, they get the job. And we are also there. I go, as you know, I go to so many conferences and trainings, and it's great because I love to be the facilitator. And I mean, there are even apps now that peer teams can get on, and it connects with other peer teams because they kind of share each other's resources, which I think is phenomenal. I know, think the police app and the sheriff's app, those are some local folks of North Carolina. And then Peer Connect, allowing a platform where you can, on your phone, like I'm struggling, and it's connecting you with those resources in your area. And of course, there's at that state level, as you know, NC Leap, and then of course there's SC Leap, and I'm sure in many other states they have the law enforcement peer support at that state level. And I've heard great things. Know the director well, and um, it's important. I know we introduce him, for agencies to say, okay, well, I have FMRT, I have Dr. Gray. I also have Aaron back to give a call if we need someone, especially for a critical incident. I know they send people in, and they're imperative for those small departments who just don't know what to do. There was a recent death by suicide of an officer in front of other officers, and I felt honored, and also when the one of the captains called and said, we're definitely going to need a critical incident appointment. I said, absolutely. What are you doing in the interim? Do you have a peer team? No, but we're calling in NC Leap. And thankfully, it sounds like those officers are doing as best as they can with that experience. But yeah, I think it is important to know those resources available to you.
Yeah, I think some of what I hear you talking about, it seems like now, and yeah, it's hard to believe I've done this for almost 20 years with FMRT, but you know, really even the last probably 10 years, I would say, we've seen sort of, we've seen a lot more openness to accepting the resources that are available, like NC Leap, that agencies are more aware of what's available and how helpful it can be. I think historically, a lot of public safety agencies sort of close ranks. We don't talk about these things. We're tough people. We don't have mental health issues. These aren't problems for us. And now I think we're seeing, even the officers who are coming through that we're seeing, they're coming in that are being hired, have a better understanding of mental health. They're more willing to talk about their issues. They're more willing to accept that these are real issues that are going to come up for them. And so that sort of acceptance and some of the breaking down of the stigma of mental health has certainly happened over the last 10 years in public safety. And I think that that's been a great development for public safety officers and agencies as a whole, is that people are recognizing that, yes, these things have impacts on people. Yes, there is help for them. Yes, if they seek this help, they will get it. And so, I think that's been a really positive thing to see.
I agree. And I also am seeing agencies recognize that you do have to market it almost, with your peer team. In the beginning, when we were supporting the implementation of peer teams, and I'm like, well, how do they find you? Like, how does your colleagues, how do they find you? They're like, well, we're on the website, and then you go to like this link and you scroll down, and of course, my background being business marketing and more of the IO psych, I'm going, okay, you need a little bit quicker access. They need to know who you are. I don't know if you have T-shirts or pins, but they should have direct access to your name, your face, and phone number. And it's even things like that it's so simple. I mean, even making yourself visible during, I mean, who is it? We'll give them a shout out, of course, when Durham, they have their new recruits go through a lot of training, one of which is with us, and helping to prepare their toolbox as far as mentally, preparing for that. But they're bringing in their peer team. I mean, go figure, right? Like, they need to know in the very beginning, this is who I can call if I'm having some struggles.
Yeah,
So I'm excited to see more of that evolve.
yeah, I think so. And it's some folks who are involved in doing this kind of work don't tend to enjoy the sort of promotion side of it. They'd rather be sort of a program of attraction versus promotion. You don't want to have to kind of like advertise so much. And at the same time, as you said, it's really important for officers and folks to know that you're there, to know how to get in contact with someone, to be able to connect that quickly. So I think it's sometimes a balance between wanting to promote what we're doing and at the same time, not make it in your face. So, but I do think access is super important, because you can have a really good peer support team, but if people don't know how to get in touch with you or how to connect with you, then I can get some.
And I think, and I'd like your thoughts on this, that, regular training amongst the team, and it doesn't have to only be FMRT. I mean, you want all kinds of different training to build those skill sets for the members. but I also think it keeps the team intact. Many times I've heard, well, we did have a peer team, and I'm like, well, what happened? And they just didn't have a regular scheduled program where they got together and they had, individuals come in and talk with them, or say, once a month we're coming together and we're talking through issues or areas without disclosing any detail. What are your thoughts around kind of keeping the agency peer team intact? What are some best practices for that?
Yeah, I think in my experience, what I have found with the agencies that are most successful at doing that, they tend to have at least one sort of champion, somebody who's, whether it's the peer support, usually it's the peer support coordinator, the person who gets put in charge of the team, tends to be that champion. They have regular meetings, and the agency supports it. So the agency provides time for these officers to be off duty, to be able to attend these trainings, and to be there in their monthly meetings and those kinds of things. And then the teams themselves, I think, value their time together. And so, yeah, I think that the teams that do that best have regular kinds of trainings. They get together regularly. They talk regularly. They usually have some kind of a champion or somebody who's, kind of the face of the program that's effective at communicating with the top line staff as to what's going on. They feel supported by the top line staff, making sure that their officers have the time to attend these trainings and those kinds of things. And so, yeah, sometimes you could get the training. Everybody's really excited after they do the 2-day training and they're ready to go. And then, it can kind of peter out if there's not regular meetings and support in terms of allowing folks to get to those meetings. And so, that's something else when you're selecting team members, is making sure that they appreciate the value of getting together regularly, of attending trainings, and that they're eager to learn these kinds of things. And so, having a good team and having a good champion seems to kind of help teams stay together, in my experience.
And having that command staff, as you're saying, with that financial support as well. I know that, and I'm going to mess up the acronym, but it's a long one. It's like LEHW. I mean, it's a grant that a lot of folks in North Carolina can apply for to get money specifically for peer support. I know a number of agencies have. I believe one of the recent bills that passed also included some funding for mental wellness, which, of course, that's something that you do as well, as those wellness appointments, again, like peer support, those proactive steps, those confidential opportunities to talk through things before they become an issue. But I know that there are more grants coming into allowing agencies to apply for that, and would encourage anybody listening to do a deep dive and find out more about it, because apparently we have a lot of money left over in our state. I don't know where it's going, but it should go to our public safety professionals, right? Our first responders need that. Well, we're kind of getting close to the end. Are there any other topics, final thoughts, anything you want to make sure that we hit on before we end our time together?
One thing that came up that I was just thinking about as we were talking was, I think the legislature recently passed a law to protect your support specialists in terms of the confidentiality and privilege. And so that is super, super helpful, because it protects their ability to maintain confidentiality with the people they have interactions with by law. And so somebody who's on a peer support team that has a confidential peer interaction is required by law to be able to maintain that confidentiality. And so without sort of a judge's order or something like that, they would not be required to disclose any information that's been shared.
Oh, well, that's a key take home point. Do you know which bill number that is? If not, we can look into it. And
it's not off the law, and I've read it, so it's in place. And so I think that's not only is that helpful, but it just also shows that the legislature and the state is supporting these kinds of interactions and conventions by codifying these things in law.
absolutely, providing the funding and also bringing clarity and the importance of confidentiality. We'll find that, and for our listeners, we'll put that on our next external newsletter so they can read more about it, as well as the other bill that I'm referring to, and then the grant with that long acronym. Well, Dr. Gray, are there any other thoughts?
No, I would just say that it's been a real pleasure and a privilege to be able to provide support to these public safety agencies. I mean, the work that these folks do on a day-to-day basis, and if you've ever had to call 911 or you've ever had to deal with some of these folks face to face in a crisis situation, then you probably understand on some level how incredibly effective and important the jobs are that they do. And so I've just been so grateful to have exposure to them and to be able to try to support them and helping them be as healthy as they can be to continue to do the great work that they're doing every day because they deserve that and they deserve to have good mental health as much as anyone else. And so it's been a real privilege. Just look forward to continuing to serve these folks and help them be the best they can be.
Well, you are an asset to them and to us, and always value our time together. And it's been great knowing you for many years, and I think we're going to continue to do great things together. Well, without further ado, I hope you have a good rest of the day. I know you got a busy week, and thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for all you do, Elizabeth.
Thanks.